Alright, 가산소 최 간디시네 아니 강라에 마되바 랑용원이 주바지요 말에스 지나 직신질의 되네 발뢰바 민 다발뢰바 다바점이요 말에 지나 현재 되네 뢰 다바점이요 반자 강라에 마되 랑용원이 주바지요 말에스 제가도 디고시 다나 지발뢰 다바점이요 반에 다발뢰 여바텔라텔 다바점이요 반나 달려 딱세 탐지 요구리베선 디앙해봐요 말에스 한 기슈 숨창고레스 타니비게 르 파다바 임바제 한 타니베 참마 생기 녀바 메바 안에 더남주기 체면 녀바 메바 디 숨창바인다 그 발르 파다바들레 되네 여바세디 다바세디 디고레스 당한절 르 파다바 임바제라 안에 타니베 참마 셴나 더남주기 체면이 녀바 메바이나 that partly a Dawa said, Chish sum the temperature.
Good afternoon. This morning we've continued to look at how all phenomena, whatever appears to mind, is not self-existent, it's not independent, but is rather dependent, in particular dependent on labeling by mind. So therefore, because it's dependent on labeling, it is clearly cannot be established from its own side. We looked, in particular this morning, we looked at the three criteria by which the three criteria that need to be fulfilled in order for something to exist conventionally. And we saw the first was that it must be well known to conventional consciousness, and this establishes existence. Secondly, it must not be invalidated by another conventional valid cognizer. This eliminates the possibility of non-existence. And then thirdly, it must not be invalidated by a reasoning consciousness analyzing the ultimate, or a reasoning consciousness that is investigating the ultimate way that, or the final way that phenomena exist. And this third then criteria, this eliminates the possibility of phenomena being established by way of their own essence. And all three of these criteria need to be fulfilled for something to exist conventionally. And if there's still some questions left over from this morning, then feel free to ask now.
I have a question from meditation session. We had a really nice meditation session. I just wanted to ask, when we're doing meditation on reality and on emptiness, is it more useful at the beginning to focus more on investigating the emptiness of the self and the aggregates, or focusing more on meditating on the emptiness of phenomena, which is more useful or important?
So when meditating on emptiness, at first, is it more useful to focus on the emptiness of the self and the aggregates, or to focus on the emptiness of phenomena, or phenomena other than the self and aggregates? Lama Tsongkhapa clearly advises that the point to start with is the self, to investigate first how our sense of self appears, and then to investigate to see if it exists in this way or not. When one comes to understand vividly for oneself that it does not exist in the way it appears, it's empty of existence in this way that it appears, then this understanding we can easily apply to the aggregates. So the starting point is the self, and thereafter to the aggregates. So between the self and the aggregates or external phenomena, the object of negation doesn't vary. But Jayam Pache advises that one should start with the self, because to get a sense of how the self appears as being truly existent is much easier than the aggregates or external phenomena. This isn't a universal presentation. In other traditions, they will not start with the self, but such as in the Dzogchen tradition, they will say one needs to realize the nature of the mind. So that would be their starting point. Andy?
I've got a problem with this entity-ness or nature, entity. So, Prasangika, the entity of the object and the object, they rise and they disappear at the same time, right? So the example was Toyota, so its entity you're talking about would be like the Toyotaness of Toyota. So they would arise and go down and disappear at the same time.
So the object and its entity would arise and disintegrate at the same time.
Yeah. So with the Svatantrika school, because of this timing, which is very crucial, surely their definitions of entity are different.
Okay. So the question is
that do they have the same definition
of entity of a phenomenon? Okay, and your question, and then the background to the question is that there's a process of arisal, abiding, and then disintegration, and the phenomenon and its essence or entity would arise, abide, and disintegrate together. At the same time, I mean. So the object arises, abides, and disintegrates, the object and its essence together. So therefore, Prasangika and Svatvantika must have a different understanding of what entity is, or what the entity of the object is, or essence is.
And is there a difference between essence and nature, or is that just an English thing?
It's different Tibetan words, same meaning. Okay. So the nature is often translated as, well, naturally existent is most commonly translated as inherently existent. So that is the same word, translated in different ways. And essence is a different word, but same meaning. Okay.
Thank you for the thank you for me. Konso mogi tseni do mogi tseni local yare. Teni konta ko chikpa ki kola samdi yare. Yo dan kongi mo ni dan namdu ke ni dan namdu ne ni dan namdu chik. Deni ne sana ko ne sana thank you for the thank you for konso ni mogi donak. That's a local inside.
Rangshin ji me se di kagare ma do ngo da ben ngo lam da ben korong gi ben duji de na duji chue na ngo ga ki ji ji ba di ko ji ba ro tin ju ba da ra ju ba ji ba ro ba ne ji ngo ki ji ba de sta ko chue de ga na korong ji ki yo de ki ji ba de ko nyam de che cha go ro ba ngo ra de ji ba ro cha go ro ba 다 건도 가르 차고를 람나 rangu ngwe ne du morup saji rangu ne du morup saji ming ta sa ge shi di pa jeba che zena nye yo re le wo da rangju bi ge rangju man che cha sang ge da rangju ba da sem zam ba da de cha sang ge ga se ne ko ngan ju pa ji通过了大家就明大山那地的地马的地亚波多下的怕这当然这个等大山西的这把这这呢年有来说了就像第年有把这让人的主把来说了听就不搞老师呢第这呢年有马来说了的第你知道的嘛对先我的本来去这个没我那没活了我操啊听吧的지과래 다 ten유바 샘잠바 가서래 랑주바 지과로 오셔야 돼.
그 배고서니까 뭐데 그 미타바래.
예, 두식이 미타 뭐 미타바.
나서 네탕치 뭐다 랑신 대 되직래. 레베 배나 뭐 기도바 랑신 기도바.
네, 뭐니 주바다 랑신 주바람나 지바차로. 원이 주바스도 그런 거에 주바스 시기 지디 지카가면 돈나 집을 지나양 뭐다 라신 라변이야 되어서 칼에 뭐세도 그런 게 내상 이게 지바스 미두시지나 다 라신 라변도 다른 집에 지는 예민이 있어야지 라신 도 많이 있어야 라신 쉐어 어디에
So firstly, in terms of their essence, the essence of an object, Svatantika Prasangika will understand it to be understand it in the same way. There's not a difference. So, for example, they both will say the essence of the object changes momentarily. Yeah, it's impermanent; it changes momentarily. Where the difference is whether the object is established from its own side or by way of its own essence or nature, whether that own essence or nature is found on analysis or not. And Svatantika say it's found. Prasangika say it's not found. Then to come to your second question, and here, okay, if something is established by way of its own essence or established by way of its own nature, synonymous. The nature of the object, the essence of the object, that differs. So the illustration would be, the essence of water is that it's moist and maybe it's flowing, I don't remember. So the essence of water is that it's moist. So this is what both schools would agree momentarily changes. Is it established by way of its own essence? Then essence in now means the same as nature, as in inherent nature. So essence can mean the same, established by way of its own essence, established by way of its own nature, is the same. But the essence of the object is different from its nature. So it's difficult because there, in these two segments, the essence of the object and established by way of its own essence, same word. But it has a different meaning. So in the one case, it's synonymous to it's empty of inherent existence, it's empty of being established by way of its own essence. So there it's synonymous. But the essence of the object would mean something different, like with water, that it's moist.
Yeah,
so there will be translated in the same way because it is the same word. So I tend to use essence, other translators sometimes use entity. So there's not a difference between entity or essence, that is the same Tibetan word.
자지 로레 자지 레네 저거 그런 거 오래 초 체를 줘로 체 송사치로 딩오 쇼라 그런 거 체 송사치라 제가 룽세디 모데 가르서 양신 요아래라 그 양보지 게디나 구요장도 해지다 게디나 구요 잡되게 안에 지금 양부 임바 저거 주는 구요 잡되게 지라 룽 그런 게 모어디는 시리에 사지 모어디는 시리에서 진짜 되는지 룽이래 맞아 게디나 구요 잡 양부이나 게디나 구요 미요체 내 뒤간지나 음을 책 말해서 제 메시지 그디나 그런 게 직 사회의 차이랑 신치 인도연지라 메시지 하고 해서지 제가도 그런 게 천이오라나 천이라나 그런 거 순서지기 시지요로 와다 내 질은 오사지 그러와 제가 당오니 유튜브라도 당오니 그런 랑원이 주바세 그거로 와다 오니 유튜브 그런 거는 오니 뭐니 주바라도 랑원이 주바 라신 유튜브 덴버 주바 아니 오니 유튜브세데 민가하마도 돈다지 바자로 양시 요하데
데니디 모고데 군소데 모 마토가 디 돈다데
모 니지 마주바 이제 모 니지 주베 동바라나 돈다데 바래 이제 모 니세데 그런 거세 군소데 군소라와 모 니지 모 니지 주베 동바라나다 돈이 차로 돈다데 바샤로
Just like water has as its essence, it's moist, fire is hot and burning, and wind is light and moving. So these are the essence of the particular element. Instead of saying essence, one could say characteristic or definition. So it's sign or definition or characteristic. If something is established by way of its own essence, then that is now different. Now it's talking about essence as meaning nature or characteristic. Again, we have that word. But there it means, it has a very different meaning. So the first way that essence is used is, maybe you could say it's conventional meaning. Well, wind is light and moving. That's conventional. But is it established by way of its own essence or not? Then that's looking at it from the ultimate perspective. So same word, but used, the word essence or entity is the same word. But if it's, what is the essence or entity of the object? Say fire, hot and burning. Is it established by way of its own essence? Now we're talking about the ultimate. We're looking at it from the ultimate perspective. So we're not talking about its conventional essence. So maybe that's then quite clear. Okay, good.
그래서 단된 마음도 식사하고 말로야지. 내내 유진 태니기 원기 여바자 민벌 네 유유원의 예비용어데 동바 세르기 강기 동유까지 세담 고된 디인스. 뒤쪽에 시에서사디. 데네 유정. No.
So now returning to the text. So it's the new outline. Therefore, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through the force of conceptual designation, is the very essence of which phenomena are empty in the expression emptiness, and is the measure or meaning of what is to be negated. And yes, sorry, in this paragraph again, I've changed the translation quite a bit, so I'll read it again. Therefore, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through the force of conceptual designation, is the very essence of which phenomena are empty in the expression emptiness, and is the measure or meaning of what is to be negated.
당연히 남윤의 지가 대신에 제바들의 랑응원의 주변 동바래에서 랑원의 주변에 동바래에서 하다. 지사다 랑응원의 주변 동바세디 동바이샤도 랑응원의 주바세디다 가샤샤로와 랑응원의 주변 동바세디 가자데 랑응원의 주바샤고로와. 지사다 디시오라 유진 탄이 원기 여바 잠민벌 저 유진 탄이 원기 여바 잠민벌스 등 아주 대지 가르쳐 최근시나 유진 탄이 원기 파샤바라스와 자바 잠마도 디멤버 요마레라와 지사다 유진 탄이 원기 여바 잠민벌스 유제 타니 원기 샤바 많이 바제 유랑근원이 여봐. 유랑근원이 여봐들라 유비 모아들라 아니 갈라 그래서네 라신 주바 세딜라고 레제레 유진 타니 원기 샤바 많이 바 유랑근원이 주비게 여봐디 유비 모아세도 뭐 유비 모아라도 되니 주바지 유나 여봐디 유나 될라 아니 모아들라 아니 라신 주바 세딜에서 라신 주바 세딜 Member 유랑근원이 유비 모아세도아 모아디 유랑근원이 주비 모아디 라신 주바 세딜에 라신 주바 덴바 주바 랑이 챙이 주바 세딜에서 오라 되는지를 라비에서 오다 유유원의 예비 모아서 제 유유원의 예비 모아라도 디니가 르파샤바자 마임바 유유원의 예비 모아디 가샤들이 해서 그러다 가샤디.
Looking then at the first part, so I'll read it a couple of times because, I've changed it a bit. Therefore, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through force of conceptual designation. So I'll read it again. Therefore, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through force of conceptual designation. This is the object of negation. So the object of negation is the object existing from its own side, without needing to be labeled or designated or imputed by mind. That is the object of negation.
대상 뭐 동 servigi 강기 동규 가자 줍체담 고된디리에서 동 servigi 강기 동규 가자 줍체담 고된디리에서 가자세 지상가 가자 랑군원의 주변 동발에 세치어로 와다 랑원의 주변 동바디 동일이 세로 랑원의 주변 동세데 랑원의 주바데 가르레랍나 간지를 뭐 송그레랍나 르파샤바 마임바 유 랑원의 주브데바데가 고레세 디 가샤데레 제자디 유 가샤 랑원의 주변 동바데라 네 동바데라 동일이 고레세 제자다 가자게 체레나 가자게 체데 가르라다 디레서 강라 르파샤바 마임바 유 랑원의 주바데라 안에 틱다디 탱기베 가수셰베 각샤세 디레스.
The sentence continues, is the very essence of which phenomena are empty in the expression emptiness, and is the meaning or the measure or meaning of what is to be negated. So I'll read the second half of the sentence again. Is the very essence of which phenomena are empty in the expression emptiness, and is the measure or meaning of what is to be negated. So what he had in the first half of the sentence is the object of negation, and the object now in the second half of the sentence, being empty of that, of what is negated, is the meaning of emptiness. So to read it all again, what is the object, so with the last, but what is the object to be negated, or what is the meaning of the object to be negated, and that we have at the beginning. An object existing from its own side, or as we've expressed it differently, existing by way of its own essence, nature, or characteristic. And you could say, and therefore, without requiring imputation by mind, or labeling or designation by mind. So the object of negation then has these two characteristics, these two parts. The first being an object existing from its own side, and as a consequence of existing from its own side, it doesn't require mere labeling by mind. That is the meaning of the object of negation, and recognizing that phenomena are empty of existing by way of its own nature or essence, or from its own side, not requiring imputation or labeling, recognizing that it's empty of existing that way, is the understanding of emptiness.
Chesanda donda ko sikti dire hang donda la de kasan ni mani shedige yu chue kaneshina an shen shi la due ne lue pa da ba zhen ni da ba ko ne yo ba res. Chesanda gang la ya ma de ba ran ngwe ne zhu ba ji yo ba na di ra xi zhu ba se de ga cha de da xie ga cha de gang la ya ma de ba yu ran ngwe ne zhu ba de ba ji yo ba na di ane gacha se de so da gacha ge che na gang lai ma de ba ran ngwe ne zhu ba di da gacha ge che se na che da de ni ji la bi re se che song sa di ran ngwe ne zhu ba ra xin zhu ba ga dong ba ni gacha se de ga ne ji la ge la na gang la yu di lo pa nang yu de ga la gang lai ma de ran ngwe ne zhu ba di zhu ba nang go de ne ran ngwe ne zhu ba di gang lai ma de ran ngwe ne zhu ba ji yue ba na de ne di da ga ra xin zhu ba se de ni ji go go re so da.
What's presented here in this first paragraph follows perfectly on from what was presented above this, that phenomena require labeling by mind. We had this in the sutra quotation, that phenomena are merely labeled by mind or exist merely as names. So here we see that phenomena require labeling by mind. They are dependent on labeling by mind. If they did not, they would be existent from their own side, self-existent, existing by way of their own essence or nature. So again, I'll read this first sentence again. Therefore, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through the force of conceptual designation, is the very essence of which phenomena are empty in the expression emptiness, and is the measure or meaning of what is to be negated.
Isn't dela so what's it dela da kam ripi ka cha seras dela da kam ripi ka cha seras dela da la gire ripi ka cha la gire isn't that gang la ma do rang wen ju ba di shi gang sa la pha cha ba ne gang sa khorong gang la ma do rang wen ju ba la na gang sa ge da di yo ma ga cha wa da di dene Gansa le shen chu yi de sheba ne gansa le shen chu pungbo la soba gang lai ma do rang wen juba de la chu gi da je sa di ko da se di so da se ko chi chi le ja do gang lai ma do rang wen juba de la da la ge res ga ji da se de ji dang da de la nya ju yue be tai de gansa o da se jo ro wa ni ma da di ga ji da se ro ga ji da ga ya ge da de yebe da ro de kun zu ye de nga de da sa o da sa che ro gang sa da mi da sa che ro di ki ma da de da sa de ga ji da la ko re se je sa de ya ko gang la ye ma do rang ngwen ne ju ba di ye ba di yang ngwen ne ju de ba di ga ji da la ge de la ri bi ga sa la ge se ri bi ga sa la ge se
Bendigo chic self-formation, auto-formation, et quand ça qui t'appelle,
풍보 nga이나 가리나다 가리 강사래 신비 최 가리된도 강라마도 랑군이 줍최 강사 마인게 최 가리네 강라마 랑군이 줍되바디 뒤최기 다 시로 하지.
The paragraph concludes with, it is also called self or object negated by reasoning. So so we see here in the first line, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through force of conceptual designation. So then this can be applied to all phenomena. This is how they appear to us, and when we investigate, we see that they do not exist in that way, and they are empty of existing in that way. And then thus we can call emptiness, being empty of existing by way of their own essence or nature or self-existence. So this replies to, in the text it says, an object, and it can be any object. So for example, the self. So when the self is taken as object, it appears as existing from its own side, without existing merely through force of conceptual designation. In other words, without requiring labeling by mind. It appears to be self-existent. When we investigate and we find it does not exist in this way, it's empty of existing in this way, we realize the emptiness of the self. The self is empty of being inherently existent or naturally existent. Here, one realizes selflessness of persons. When, again, therefore, an object existing from its own side, if the object then is not at the self, but let's say it's anything other than the self, so any one of the aggregates, or the collection of the aggregates, or an external phenomenon, anything other than the self, that too appears to exist from its own side without existing merely through force of conceptual designation. And when we realize that it's empty of existing in that way, despite appearing as so, we realize emptiness, and this is called this emptiness is called the selflessness of phenomena. So what we see here is for the selflessness of persons, which applies to the basis of the self, and the selflessness of phenomena, which applies to anything other than the self. The object of negation is the same, an object existing from its own side, without existing merely through force of conceptual designation. So there's no difference there in terms of the object to be negated, whatever the basis may be. The one is called the realization of the selflessness of persons, and all others are called the selflessness of phenomena, but the realization is the same. And then one last thing to add, the self that is being refuted here is not the conventional self that exists. I'm sitting, I'm listening, I'm talking. But the self that appears to mind, appears to exist by way of its own nature, that self is the object of negation. It's a non-existent.
And the Yorubesine, Sawakino Yomares. Ko Dene Huminio Redde, Yama de Yobajo, Dademeba Chava Rebes in Dineamares. And now Dadi Yomar the Mahomba Yungurubes in Diamares. Yama Yomare, Dade Yomar, Mahomba Yomar, says Kala Yama to run when you droop your body. Sawakino Yomares, says a Dene, Dene Yomares, Yama Yomare, Dade Yomare, Mahomba Yungmares, says the Mebach, Sawakini Mebach. Tiene yu manyo shikin shikla shiksoda. Shik said Bardone.
Now going to the next paragraph on the top of page 19, and from here the translation doesn't change. So reading the first half of the first sentence. Since it absolutely has never been known to validly exist, the object then to be negated, which is an object existing from its own side, has never, not once in any object since beginningless time, been found to exist, nor will it ever. No object is going to come into existence or be newly discovered that exists from its own side. So the it, and since it absolutely has never been known to validly exist, refers to the object of negation, an object existing from its own side or by way of its own nature or essence.
Marikpa like it is, Chesang Tenzin Marikpa says, Kasu Tenzin Marikpa like it is, or that. Tela, Yuber Shimbi Ludilla Marikpa says.
Because this is something that has never ever been found to exist, a consciousness that grasps at it, apprehends it as existing, is not in accordance with reality, and is therefore an ignorance. And that's how this first sentence concludes. An awareness that clings to it, the object of negation, as existent, is called ignorance.
Dandala Kangla Yamatuba Rang when you Drubadi, 가자레스 가자레 다등한도 튕기베 가야 가샤세 디레스 제스나다 강라마도 랑원이 두바 자오기네 요 말에데 이나 아주글로 나올려 딩아줄로 난고 강라마 랑원이 두바 난고래 나와나 싱아줄로기 요바 징고레스 디진빌로딜라 다제 마리파스 가사 마리파세 디레스 덴진 마리파세 디레스 어디 단다 디레다 먼저
The meaning then is that the object of negation for Prasangika is that a phenomenon existing from its own side, and the consciousness that believes that phenomena exist in the way they appear, which is as if they exist from their own side or by their own nature or essence. That consciousness that grasps at the appearance as being in accordance with reality when it is not, is an ignorance. It's believing that phenomena exist from their own side when they do not. Therefore, it's an ignorance. And it's amongst the many ignorances, but it is the ignorance of true grasping. The ignorance that grasps at phenomena as existing in the way they appear, that their appearance is true or correct or real when it is not. And that is and therefore it is an ignorance.
Nondala kala yuma to rang window to but zimbigi zimbadi denzero ko denzi mark passage ruada. The nyumo tamji yu zawadi ko denzi mark passage aro. The denzi marba the yudi garela na yudi kala rang window to body. Ko tingoroa zimbaza denzi mariba the yu garela na zindang yudi garela na kala ma to rang window to body is. Di gacha deres. Daga denzi mariba zinda yudi 가르샤그relana 칼라이마도 랑wen이 두바디샤 디 가차세데 디 가고데레스 제자 리비 가차세데 디리에세데 먼저기다 돈달라 칼라이마도 랑wen이 두바 짐비기 짐바디 딘지 마리파레 디기 진다 유 칼라이마도 바디 랑wen이 두바디 진다 유샤디 가차 가야데레 가차데레서 칼라이마도 랑wen이 두바 징고로와 제자 짐비기 로디고 유젠디체 디 가리 징고르선 갈라마 랑문이 두바 디 징고르바 제가 그 유디 가르선 갈라마 랑문이 두바디 유리셰 제가 디 요마르와 자와이네 요마레스 제가 디 가자 리비 가자 디리에스 그래서 갈라마 두바 랑문이 두바디 징고르바디 랑문이 두바디 디 가자 디 리비 가자 디리에스
As the sentence concludes, an awareness that clings to it as existent is called ignorance. And in particular, this is the ignorance of true grasping. Grasping at phenomena as existing in the way they appear. And this ignorance is the root cause of all our afflictions and suffering. And this ignorance of true grasping has as its object that it grasps at an object as existing by way of its own nature or essence or characteristic or from its own side. So this ignorance grasps at the phenomena as existing the way that it appears, which means established by way of its own essence, nature, characteristics or from its own side. And this is the object of the mode of apprehension, is that phenomena are self-existent. And this is negated through reasoning. That is the object of the mode of apprehension, apprehending phenomena as existing inherently, that we had in the previous paragraph, is the object negated by reasoning. So there we see at the end of the bottom of page 18, object negated by reasoning refers to the object of negation, which here is the object existing from its own side, is to be negated by reasoning.
Rigbi gacha da lamji gacha ga goya de da gacha da nga so ga goya de la rigbi ga ya ji da lam gom je ga goya ji yin xiao wo da de ga lai ma de rang wen de zhu ba jin bi dian jing hu rong ga goya de 제사다 강라 랑윤의 주바지미 딘진 코롱 가회지 람곰 제메바서 고래 람곰 제메바서 고래 딘진 디 강라 랑윤의 주바지미 딘진 줘와 고 셰바로와 로로셰 딘진디 마릭바디 뇨모 탐제 자위 규다진 마릭바디 디 가자레 간주 규라 요르디 메바서 고래제레 디 메바서야 돼 가는 소스 람곰베 톱기 곰메바서 고래스 제사고 델라 람니 가자서 람곰베 톱기 곰메바서 고엔자 아니 고 람니 가자레스 고래 다모디라샤나.
So there are two objects of negation. One is the object that is negated by reasoning, and the other is the object of negation by the path, or by meditating on the path. So let's look at the second one, the object of negation by the path, or by meditating on the path. So this is the consciousness of true grasping, the root cause of all our afflictions. So this is the object of negation that is negated by meditating on the path. And it is the consciousness of true grasping, the root cause of all our afflictions.
And denzindi nganzo gacha ni na ripe gacha na lamji gacha na ne ko lamgom kom gacha dire ko denzindi yede bareche da ji denzindi yorwa shebar nyomo baro yorwa ko jisadi lamji gacha rese shi de dirwa da di yudi denzindi yudi jinda yudi garesna kala ma do rang ngoni dubadewa kala ma do rang ngoni dubadi denzindi ge jinda yudi rwa dene ndi yomarwa 강라마 랑원이 주바디 요마르와 메나야 고 진디고로 진고 지나 강라마도 랑원이 주바디 요마레디 디 가샤디 고 메바인자 람곰네 고 메바서 가시요 마레스 지나 데디 가레라네 텔레 리비 가자라 그래서 리비 가자라고도 강라야마도 랑원이 주바디 파제바 제제 심주 제제 고 민두선비게 체미기 동방이 또 소나 고가 가르고 그래서 체미 임마지 동방이 또 하나 가고 그래 람 곰고 인지 곰고 곰네 매가서 거요 말해서 그 하고는 지고 그래서 하고는 또 산 동방이 또 쓰나 아니 그 파가르고 가고 그래서 동디 그 매바도 동방이 또 어디 강라만 랑원이 주바데 매바 하고 살아 봐다 매바 하고 산자 다디 양자 곰매바 하고 해야 되는 람 곰고야스 가요 말지 차지 하고 산다 살아다고 양자 곰고야 람 곰고야 말했어요. 제사디 그 리비 가자레스 그 리비게 김전 삼다 제바체네 그 랑시 주베 동바 동인 또도 그 매바 하고 가살다 롱을 매바 가살 매바 하고 살에 제사다 양자 하고 해야 된다라 람 곰고야스요 말 와지 제사 될 리비 가자레스 람지 가자 말해서 그래.
람비 가자 대 카르스
람이 가샤시고 다디지 덴진디 메바서야라 동방이 또 베셔데 야네 곰나 마도 덴진디 메바서 두고마르와 덴진들 바 뉴바춘춘 담마데 덴진들 로르와 셰바르와 셰바디 곰고 유아다지 호 곰나 마도 하고 와진 덴진 디레샤선 바 하고나 덴진 메바서 두고마르와 덴진 덴바 동방이 또나 덴제하고 어디 덴제를 로셰 레샤서 하고도 다 리샤선 샤샤나 덴제 메바서 두고 말아디 동방이 또 별로데 야네 곰발에 띠네 덴진 마 슉충슈 다네 그 메바서 고래제 제자디 람지 가자레서 오라 덴메 라신 주바 코랑까야디 하고야디 동방이 또도 라신 주바디 메바다 하고 고래서 다 하고 사회제란 양자 하고야 되나 람곰고야서 가야 말이지 제가 그 리비가자 람디가자 개발을 하시더래.
이상부가서 이 리비가는 다고 람디가자도 대사
다들라디 니엘 다니엘 림바스키 셰마다도 보두스네 니엘라션.
First, just to repeat, the object of negation by the path. This is the ignorance of true grasping, the cause of all our afflicted minds, and it is an existent. So this object of negation exists because it's a consciousness. We have this consciousness, the ignorance of true grasping, and it is eradicated through meditating on the path. What that means is we cultivate repeatedly over a sustained period the wisdom realizing emptiness. And we need to keep realizing emptiness so as to weaken and eventually eradicate this object of negation, our ignorance of true grasping. So I'll just say this again just to make sure this first one is clear. The object of negation by the path is the ignorance of true grasping. It exists, being a consciousness, and it's negated through cultivating the path. In other words, through meditating on emptiness again and again and again. And as we strengthen our wisdom, realizing emptiness, we weaken and eventually eradicate the contrary, ignorant grasping at true existence. So that's the first object of negation, which is eradicated by the path. And the object of negation is the ignorance of true grasping, which is inexistent. The second type of object of negation is that which is negated by reasoning, and this is true existence itself, or as is being used here, existent from its own side. So this is a non-existent. So here the second object of negation is a non-existent, and that is existence from its own side, true existence, inherent existence, natural existence. This is the object of negation, which is a non-existent, and it is eradicated by reasoning, analysis, investigation. And it comes about through having a thorough understanding that phenomena cannot exist in the way they appear. They cannot exist by way of their own nature. So this is understood through reasoning. So we intellectually understand through reasoning that phenomena cannot exist from their own side. And in this way, we negate this object of negation, which is a non-existent, which is that phenomena exist from their own side.
Rigbi gacha, dagam rigbi gacha, the rigba situation to Loda rigba said the river choir, rigba so Jumsen Yada, so Jumsen Yada. There's another Tombani, Demba Matubare said the Rashi Madu Tombani Tobala, Rigbet, Jumsen Jebache, Jumsen Yani Tentigi Namja, Jumsen Samtadu, sometimes the Ganzam Chile, Tongsang Toyondu, then Galaima the Rangu in the Mindu Sempi Hago Sarva. Then Hago Sana, then got Yaja, the Hagoya Dondala, Yaja Jebache Hoyomata Hago Sasarva, that's Sarjing Bato Merva. Then the JS Melmaro. Tagarason Tomba into Lodi Comche, the naked Dembertuba, Zimbi, Zimbi, Lord Dembertuba, now you Lodima, you are tired, the Comqua, Lam Comqua, you are tired, the Combo Mato. Dembertuba rang when it was a Ganesh and Piggy, the Hagoya Dunda, Com Jaguo Marvada. Rang when the Juba de Ganesh Hagoya Dundala, Com Jaguo Marva, Com Jadi, Denzin the Meva Say Dundal Com Jagorova. Tombani doors had a rang when the Juba de Meva Hago Sarvada. Sarji Hawasana didn't Sasser, Yaja, Hagoya Dundala, Comjawa, Jevachawa, Hawa Sasarva. Then I had to Meruchina, Sawaim body, Jimele to the Lapa to Sarji Hawasana didn't get in the Mashibado, made the Sawari, Samado, Miss Hawaii Jumsen, Jebach, and Miss Hawaii, some Tango, Morocco, getting another Sawaim Mashibado, that is Sawaim Bahago, called Sarjik Nesavanza. Dinashi, Tombani to Jebajina, Jebaji, Big Jebaji, Rangun to Yena Mena, Jebaji, Gimza, Samda, Jebajin, and Ranjin to be Tony, Tonodu, Ranjin to be the Meva, the Hawasata, Jesnada, Ribi Gaja said, Comeva, the Hawasari. Jesnadadi, Ranjin to body, Yemega Hagoya, Dundal, Yankara, Jebaji, Lam Gomgoya, Gayamada, Hawas Jixasaro. The Gomgoya, the Garrison, that Meva Hagona, young Ranjin Juba. Nang Dukenda, Nan Zinduke, loading around to kill a Yovarida. Did loading around to get low now, Yedi by Inza, 니 공구 길리지는 마도 남사 곧 하고 와자니 매봐서 투에 매봐리다. 지사 덴진디 람기가 제래라고 하데 람 곰지 림베진도 마슈 춘주로 따제 매봐서 마도 코 덴진 레샤자 하고 와잠기 지고 말해서 그러다. 라싱 주비 동바세 라싱 주바세는 여라 매세 제바지야디 고 제바지는 살직 또 사는 딘 리사래서.
The object of negation by reasoning, this is where one eradicates the object of negation which is a non-existent, namely that phenomena exist from their own side or by way of their own nature or essence. This is brought about through engaging in investigation or analysis based on correct reasons. So here, one repeatedly investigates and analyzes based on reasoning, on correct reasons, to establish that phenomena cannot exist from their own side. They cannot be self-existent. When one then comes, and this then requires a lot of repetition, but one will reach the point where one has a thorough understanding, one has no doubt at all that phenomena cannot exist from their own side. So this is cultivating the object of negation by reasoning. The object of cultivating the object of negation by the path differs. This follows. This comes this comes afterwards. So here, this first part, cultivating the object of negation by reasoning, can be likened to, probably as a young child, one placed one's hand in fire. One learnt it was hot. One never had to once again think, is fire hot or not? We had no doubts anymore. So there, in a similar way, when one's doubts or suspicions that phenomena, do they or don't they exist from their own side, have been completely eradicated, we've cultivated the object of negation by reasoning, we've eradicated the non-existent object of negation, that phenomena exist by way of their own essence or nature or from their own side. And then we need to, and this will have taken a lot of contemplation. It's not just one heard, one understood, and it's done, but just like when you've touched fire and you've understood that fire is hot, you may have been told by your parents, but that was insufficient. One had to experience it. So similarly, one gets to that point where one has no doubt at all that phenomena cannot exist by way of their own nature. Then one needs to still eradicate the object of negation by the path, which is an existence, and this is the consciousness, the ignorance of true grasping. So here, on the basis of all our analysis based on correct reasoning, one meditates again and again and again, cultivating this ever stronger within us, this correct understanding of reality, this wisdom, and thereby we start to weaken the contrary consciousness, the ignorance of true grasping. So here we engage in this process of thinking how phenomena exist, of thinking that phenomena appear to be truly existent, but they cannot exist in this way. And then we need to, when we gain a certainty of that, engage in meditating on that phenomena cannot exist in this way, or do not exist in this way, so as to eradicate our ignorance of true grasping. And then, both in and out of meditation, everything that appears to us, we recognize it appears in a way that it cannot exist. So we know it cannot exist in this way, despite appearing in this way. And in this way, we continue our progress in weakening our ignorance of true grasping. So the sequence is, first, we cultivate or we eradicate the object of negation by reasoning, that things, whether things exist truly or not. In dependence on that successful eradication, we cultivate the object of negation eradicated by the path, where we meditate again and again, cultivating our wisdom, eradicating the ignorance of true grasping, eradicating the consciousness that grasps at phenomena as existing in the way they appear.
Dine inzada tangbo nga zuki rigbi kacha di kaya di, rigbi kacha kasi di rigbi kacha. Chisa gyumze yangda samdang je jeba che du chine rangwani zhuba nangwa na shula nangwa du mi du jeba che du gansam jiliya ane gangla ma rangwani zhuba dongsang dongyong du dongsang dongyong du rigbi kacha di pa kaba se. Tachi lui dongpa yi do cawa yinza gangla ma rangwani zhuba di mindu sanpega hawa sa rigbi kacha rigba che gadang di le cha. 다 디제라다 매반자다 아니 매나양 랑원이 주버진비 덴진디다 데누 나니 덴진디가다 디 매바서야라 다 데니기 리베가죠 동방이 또 서요 로디 동방이 또 로디 곰고 글리 지는 야 곰고 쟤는 마 덴진디 마슈 초초 다야 가야 돼 세상은 저기 가자 가야 리베 가자 가야 나 남이 가자 니게 나네 당보데 리베 가자디 가야지 니바 남이 리베 가자 가야 돼 림바도 이제 디샤고 해. 대마도 리뷰 가책이 막아봐도 남이 가자 가야 돼. 공개해도 용 말해.
It's good to have this clear, so I'll repeat the presentation on these two objects of negation. And I'll present it now in the sequence of training. And this sequence is definite. One has to proceed in this sequence. So one starts with reflecting on how phenomena would exist if they were existent from their own side. And then we investigate to come to understand, investigate based on correct reasonings that phenomena cannot exist in this way. So we're negating maybe I could say the concept of true existence. The concept negating that it is the possibility of phenomena existing by way of their own essence or nature. And here, when we come to realize emptiness, we have eradicated then the object of negation by reasoning. And here, this object of negation is a non-existent because true existence does not exist. So this is the first step, is reflecting again and again based on correct reasonings that phenomena cannot exist from their own side. And when we realize that they are empty of existing from their own side, we have eradicated the object of negation by reasoning, true existence or natural existence. And that itself is the object of negation, which is a non-existent. Then we progress to eradicate the object of negation, which is an existence, the ignorance of true grasping. And this is eradicated by the path, meaning this our wisdom that we have realizing emptiness, that we have already cultivated, we now deepen our familiarity. So here we remember the synonyms for meditation are habituation and familiarity or familiarization. So we familiarize ourselves, habituate ourselves to reality. Again and again and again, meditating on emptiness, recognizing how phenomena appear and they are empty of existing in the way they appear. And in this way, we eradicate the object of negation, which is now an existence, the ignorance of true grasping. And we do so through repeatedly meditating on or cultivating the wisdom realizing emptiness. So this is the second step in the sequence, and the sequence is definite.
지난 리비 가자 가세디 내가 가세 고해디 가르고 무슨 지 연구요 버질 가야지 삼나 싶고로 가라도 직도 디라고 봐. 지난 리비 가자도 요코로 요 말아. 고 요코로 매 봐서 가세디 가르라는 고로 매 봐. 민두 선배 하고 해야 되다 그래. 매 봐 하고 해야 돼. 리비 가자 가세디 동방이 또한도 장신주바 매 봐다 하고 그러 봐. 장신주바도 민두 선배가 하고도. 지난 디 장신주바 매 봐 하고 해야 돼. 라진 주보코로 매바 하고는 리비가자 까라고 그래. 까다디 매바 하고 해야 되리다. 하고 해야 될 리비가자 까라마도 그 가스도 연구여 봐지 매바지 써야 말해. 그 매바 써야 거려 봐. 이거 거려 말해. 이거 매바서 그 매바 써야 스카요 말아. 제가다 매바 하고 해야 돼. 라신 주보 제바지 라신 주보 동상이 동방에 또 어디 라신 주보에 매바 하고 그래. 매바하고 다가랑기 리베카자 까라고 그 리베카자 까셔야 되다 디라고 돈다라
이것은 이미 하고 롱말에 야매를 토파
하고서는 세메 또 봐시고라 동방이 동용도 라신 주바 매바디 하고고로 신고로 와 제자다 뒤에 시바 다가랑기다 리베카자 까세 디레 하고 다 또탕디데 동방이 또 돈다라 동방이 또야 되래 동방이 또용도 근데 라신 주바 매바디 하고고 제자디 동방이 또용도 리베카자 까바래 라신 주바 여바 매바디 하고 살래 제자 라신 주바 리베카자데 까세디 고 매바하고서 다가라래 디마도요 말해
Looking again at the object of negation by reasoning. So this object of negation is a non-existent, and that is where one comes to use reasoning to understand why it is impossible for phenomena to exist by way of their own nature. That no phenomenon anywhere ever has been found to exist by way of its own nature. So here we're eradicating this non-existent, this object of negation, which is a non-existent, true existence. And when we come to know that it is non-existent, or understand that it is non-existent, then we have eradicated the object of negation by reasoning. What is it that we have come to know? We've come to know that phenomena do not exist truly, but are empty of being truly existent. To express it differently, we've come to know that phenomena are not naturally existent, but are empty of being naturally existent. So therefore, we have come to understand emptiness, come to know emptiness. So what does it mean here to know something, to understand something? It means that one has realized with a valid cognizer, not merely intellectually, but realized with a valid cognizer that phenomena are empty of inherent existence, that phenomena are empty of true existence, that phenomena do not exist in the way they appear.
The Denzin said, "Ko lamji kajarwa." The Denzin said, "Ko lam gom tongbangi to be shared the gom chen, geli kon nuba chung da gom go. Jesa gom Denzin. Denzin ribi kaja, lamji kaja la imba, lamji kaja, Denzin de pa meba suela, Denzin de yorwa, ngazo lona, ngazo sen na lo yode go. Yode banza, da go meba suela, ngazo ki lam tongbangi to be shared the gom che, and ko tongbangi to be shared the gom kaje, tongbangi to be shared nuba che ko nuba chung go. Jesa ko pang ya de, me dinesin meba su go. Je ko Denzin de yorwa, jesa yobanza ko yoga jel geli che meba su man, namsa ko ha ko wa zin meba cha yo mare, jesa di meba su go le che. Jesa da gedi meba su sai gri es de, so na gedi meba su sai gri la ne, diwar le baina. jesa ngan jugi janju senpa taba chimpi lamnyamne chegen china janju senpe sa yeba topyo du denzin de meba bangsa de denzin ma bangsa ko bangko re de janju senpa mayinba ni mini nyandyo da rangje lamnyamne chegen china jaju mi jebo topyo du denzin de meba shi namji gacha denzin de meba su ko re.
So that was the first type of object of negation, which is eradicated by reasoning. Now the second type, that follows afterwards, the object of negation by the path. So here, the object to be negated is an existent, it's the ignorance of true grasping. So the object of negation in the first one, by reasoning, was true existence, and now the object of negation by the path is true grasping. The first object of negation is a non-existent, the second object of negation is an existent. And its mode, or it's the way that this object of negation is negated, is by repeatedly over a sustained period meditating on emptiness, cultivating, strengthening our wisdom realizing emptiness within us until we've completely eradicated the object of negation by the path. So the path is, this mental path that we are cultivating is the wisdom realizing emptiness. And this mental path is what eradicates this object of negation, which is an existence, the ignorance of true grasping. So when is the object of negation by the path eradicated. If the practitioner is a bodhisattva, then when they achieve the 8th of the bodhisattva grounds, that is when they have eradicated the object of negation by the path, the ignorance of true grasping. If the practitioner is of the hero solitary realizer type, so with a Tibetan practitioner, when they become an arat or a foe destroyer, that is when they have eradicated their object of negation by the path.
Gacha Dongbanyi Gacha said the conditions didn't legure simple Gacha the Pang Sungo di Geshe Muchagore. Gacha de Palo Pang Masona, Manzu Gacha Gayala, Dongbanyi to Marwa, Shabachi Tumar. Chesan Dambo, Gacha de Musun, Lola Dinichi Legri as a Gacha Lord Pang Musun. Didn't Anzuki, Dati, and it Nichiki, Jabache, and Shimchuchin, Jabache. And you had made Jabacho, says that the Gacha Muson, Lola, and Muson had Bemasi, Geshe that the Tichagore.
Hopefully, my presentation of the two objects of negation is now clear. And from this, what I hope is also clear is something that we looked at in a previous outline some time ago, the great importance of coming to identify for oneself the object of negation. Because we see here the object of negation by reasoning by path, we need to realize that phenomena are empty of this. So how can we realize, how can we negate an object without clearly identifying that object to be negated? So therefore it is crucial that we identify the object of negation. Because it's only by having identified something that we can eradicate it. Without having identified something, we cannot search for it. We cannot come to understand that phenomena lack this characteristic, or is empty of it. So we have to first identify the object in order to be able to negate it.
And Michigi Modrajik, Michigi Modradi, Tanganzuku Modra Mambu, Chinala Shasanala, Du Mindu said Sejanzuki Sejnabala, that been a Tanganzuki at that disorder, the Nazo Saneki Pombu Modradi, Saneki Pombu Choro, Pombu, Sanias. Bendigo Bombu Chioro, Sani Sori. Which is such a near so such in the Anzuki Bombu Chisho Choro. The Koi Mortadi, the bargain Mambunana, the Mortad do a Minus Shimjuvala, Chesan Korong and Mortadi. I didn't say what you heard, said Mortad Damba Gogorwa, didn't she to Mommy Matomba in there, Mortad didn't stop that I. Andra didn't say what you heard, said how go. Di Hamoala, Pomodi Mortadi, Bagana do is a Mindusin, Kagina, how to Yamarwa. The Hago and Dango didn't your mortar, didn't your, and the Sushi didn't your Casa, I didn't your res. And the council, the Mortar Shasnala, do give me the Session, and by that Dushin and Lolia, Carlos and Shalia, Mortar Sushi didn't say I didn't see your was and be some lotage, didn't bad say you do, didn't go to Kawache delay, they Mindu and Pacho delay Mindusin, then in the how. The Motaga Sushi down, I the Hamowache, Odin Anzuki, the Sunny Bombu Mortar, the Corona, Bagadi, you may taste Alamne, Dagato, Karina, Dimendo, Moraya was born a Dimendo some sort of Dimendo, then Dovas and Karinas, Seba to Marwa. Chesnati, Mortar, Sushi, and Sobdata, I Jajad Hakobina, then you could say the Woody Hakoshara. Dinashi, that Dambong as the Rang when the Juba said, Ganichi Legure, Savage, Di Hagotan, Dambo Lolpa, Di Genichi Legure, Lolpa Yakusha, Yakusha. Shabaina, and that because Kawacheva, she got it into Jeva Chevene, or that Jeva Lela Shawores. She's a Dambo, Dineza Dambo, Gachadi, Lorpa, Musoyala, Bekichimures order.
let's say you want to have a discussion with the mayor, and you meet them somewhere, and they say, "Oh, I don't have time right now, but I'll meet you by my car, and we'll have the conversation you need to have. We'll have it over there." And now you go off to their car to meet them in a little while. And if you go with just the presumption that, well, they're the mayor, they probably drive an impressive car, you'll go to this big car park and say, "Which one's most impressive?" And that must be the mayor's car. That is not so clear. One hasn't at all clearly identified the mayor's car. So if previously you had asked the mayor for an indication of what type of car she drives, and she says, "Oh, it's this make and model and color," off you go, and you'll probably be able to find it. But still, one really cannot say when you're standing next to it, this is definitely the mayor's car, because what if there's another similar car elsewhere? So what one really needs from the mayor is not just the make, the model, and the color, but also the number plate. Then you'll know you'll be waiting by the correct car. So this then illustrates the need to clearly identify what it is that you're seeking, to be able to know whether you have definitely found it or whether it definitely does not exist.
나 니게 랑 응원이 주바 세디 다 하고야야 당어도 신다 니기 동반이래 제바체 고로 수요도 갑래 디네 사다 아주 가르하고 가자 등을 소야라 디네 다 시직래 자네 쇼고다 제자다 다당 강사당 강사래 신비 취이나데 강사 세딩 아주 강사를 삼다 두시 삼다 두신당 아주 두신 삼다에 다 가자 강사 세딩 아주 나 소소라 나 세죠로다 나 세죠로와 나 세유도 삼다 나 세디 롤바 가니시 난거도 당보 샹다 나주기다 샹다 삼라 가야 마다바제 다 남도 샹다 차상까지 나 세디 롤바 가니시 난거도 심비 소소로라 나나디 두 심주제 오고다 심주제네도 심주지데 가점질야 나 세디 롤바 나이도 갑라 나도 풍보디서 마인바 풍보딜라 지고 메디어바체 코롱코롱랑기 예디바 로지 능고랑서 랑 코롱원에 주드베 능고 디낭도디다 라신주바 나타데 각자 나타데 제산 디낭타디 제도 신의 심주체데 깔라 제산 나 세디 강라에 모두 나주기 수기 풍보도 최고 풍보가 보 가야 마인게 강라에 모두 코롱원에 예디바 지로 파나디 거래 디낭소디 라신주바 나수디레다 당보 딩워처고 제산 딩워처 발라 당보 나 세디 두시는 나 세디 가데스도아 셈비기도 진짜 삼당 나도 람사를 차 책임을 와서도 삼다도 간점질이야 나세디 롤야 안징아세 나이도 갑라 강라야 마도 코롱원이 두바 나도 괜찮 지는 거래.
So the meditation starts with coming to identify the object of negation. So one can take any phenomenon because they all appear in the same way to be truly existent. So one can take the self, the aggregate, or any other phenomenon, but we'll take the self because that is recommended as being easiest, coming to gain to identify our sense of self. So one sits quietly with a mind that is undistracted to other thoughts and tries to identify how our self, our sense of self appears to us. And you'll see that it seems to appear as if it's separate from our physical and mental aggregates. And this then is the object of negation. And this is what we need to investigate to see whether it exists in the way that it appears, whether the self exists in the way that it appears or not. But that starting point, before one can investigate, is to identify how the self or our sense of self appears to us. And this isn't easy. This is something we are so habituated to, we take it for granted. So it takes repeated effort to come to identify how our I or our sense of self appears.
Denigi Nangsu, Galam Juba, Nanduge, Galama, the Rangun, Nansu, the Ranshin Juba, Nansu. Jin Hadida, Dinao, Nashin, Jikta, Galama, Rangun, Juba, the Rebe. That's question she said. Nayala, Denish Nangutu, now Nashin, Don Rebe, says it. Then as Duro and is then Jalash, and what the Ninju Tongo, the Ninju Tongu, and Gaspard to spread Chado, twice your Chado, Chapu. Chapo Pade, Chapo Yobo, which twice your that you do that night in the Chapo do as ya do send Denison, you would your now Anashi made together your Chesa Dinashin, now to Kabla, Gala mother rang when to Tubachin, Gala Matubashi, Korong when you hear about Nangore. Didn't Nangu now Anashin, then I said, Gala Matuba, Korong when you took to your mother said that seems to say at Chapel, says she had.
First, one needs to come to see how the self appears. Thereafter, to see if it exists in the way that it appears or not. Or to express it in a more technical way, to see whether its way of abiding and existing is in accordance or harmony. Its appearance and how it exists in reality, are they in accordance or not, in harmony or not? So sometimes in your daily life, you may have this experience. Let's say you're in a shop and you see something and it's attractive, so you want to pick it up. And you have an idea of what this object will feel like. Perhaps it looks like it's very solid, and you pick it up, but it immediately flops over in your hand, and there's a bit of a surprise. So there is a clear illustration to you when this happens, that the way something appeared is not how it exists. It looks so hard and solid, and then you touched it and it was soft. So this is what we need to try to get to with the sense of self. How does it appear? Identify that clearly and seek it out to see if the way that the self appears is in accordance with how it exists or not.
풍보를 때네 강바디 구교 땅지 저와 될을 떼어마도 풍보대 풍보 강보 구교 마다 발라 아니 가살 줘야 개민도아 나 저봐 나 주고열네 니 풍보 구교 풍보를 떼네 줘고 거래 대상아 나 지금 저와다 되어봐다 자와 가르치는 제베데 풍보실을 떼네 지고마도 풍보라 마되어 봐데 가사디 줘야 민도 아니 계시야 민도 아니 가야 퇴 자와 가야 재미도 세상 가사디 자와 같이 먼저 풍보를 뛰네 제고 뛰고도 세상디 뛰고도 와서 제대 제자디 도스 라바로 삼다나 차가로 와 세상 가사 생각주 니 기시에디 니 제레당 아니 최도다 우야마다 딜 뛰고도 마도 딜 마도 바지 아니 기시야 가민도 와서 세상 가사 코론 딜 뛰고도 그냥 가사디 파 조구에 세야 강바 구교단지 공바지 지직대 수불을 떼어와도 수불을 맞아봐 가사 줘야 수부 대샤샤제 가사 코는 줘야면도 진짜 누 삼다데 가사 세야디 풍보라 맞아봐지 그 낭수들라 강라 맞아봐 풍보라 맞아봐 코는 원에 주베 nen고할 때 나와나신 풍보라 맞아봐지 레기면도 풍보데 제와도 풍보를 떼고도 선배게 삼로시 리그로 봐 누 진행한 저기 바 심지체다 되는 지오를 해야 돼.
When one thinks about this well, one can become quite skilled and thereby apply this to a wide variety of circumstances, both in and out of meditation. For example, any form of movement that we engage in, this comes about in dependence on moving, on our form aggregate, our body moving. So if we go somewhere, we usually need to walk. So that we can see that this movement comes about in dependence on our body and our mind. Likewise, our wishes, our aspirations, our wants and desires, these too come about in dependence on our aggregates, particularly our mental aggregates. Similarly, speech. This is also dependent. It depends on the interaction of my body and my mind. There's the wish to say something, and then there's vocal and mouth expressions that are required for speech to come. So when you think like this and apply it to a wide variety of circumstances, we come to see that things are not solid and fixed, but there's this dynamic flow, this interaction of a variety of causes and parts. And this is a very different understanding of reality.
Andinashin Pumbo Nang Nga said the Kala Mother Pumbo Abotile, Dewa Guni made a rang window to Nawa Nashinchi, Jevachin, Nawa Nashinchi, Dunla, these two Sinapa Jevachi, Sugi Pumbo Dine, and then Namai Pasha, and then Toy Pumboasha, Dushi Pumba, Nabashi Pumbo, Chasa Pasha, and then Dele Loso, and Naji, D. Ranshin, the Loso, then I tell Kinim and Naji, Surdu. 샤야기 통하기는 매들. 강라이 마디오 바 풍볼 대화매 봐는 거로 봐. 나와 나신다 풍보단 대화매 행 아직 가와두세네. 다 풍보다 넘버 쉐바 초이 풍보가 파샤네. 다 아직 산다지를 녀두에스네. 녀기네민도 와서.
For example, then, when meditating on the self, you get to identify how the self appears to be self-existent, independent. Then one investigates, one comes to recognize it cannot exist independently. It moves independent on the body, and that moves independent on the mind. Likewise, the various emotions that arise, and or maybe personality traits that we have. These are not self-existent. They may appear as being something fixed and solid and independent, but they too have come about dependently. So here you can take the 5 aggregates and look at how our sense of self is so dependent on these, not separate, because the self that appears to be independent, self-existence, appears as if it exists separate or different from the aggregates. But when we investigate, we readily recognize that this appearance is false. The self does not exist in this way, but is rather dependent on and entwined with the aggregates.
Donda Ningbo ding on the Kazan Chikshe, the Chasan Dire, Dondala, Nyomo Baki, Gudi Dinzi Marik Passages. Chisan Dinzi Marik Batella, you Karis Nangoran, Kala Mato Rangun to Nangore. That in our Shinjik, Dondala, Due Mindus Jebachedu, and that thing on to get chi Kasa to charge and says some Dangadi. Lola Nanta Kadish Nangu, Sipiki Tampo Nantadi, Yahuji, some time. Then Nantadi, Dinish Nangdua, Sepi, how going to do? That Dinish Nangudu, Nawana, Shinjikta, Dondala, Dinish Yona Mena, Sepicata, Shimchi Cheduta, Nanzu Pumbotan, and the Sova, Dusheta, Dujan, number Shebi, number Shepa, Desolatine, Nanzu Jeva Chedu, and Duce Jeva Kansam Chilia, Deso, and the Desola, the Jawa Gunemen, Jeme, Dunshen, Desola Matu Bigi, Nadi. Mindu Sampi Samlati Little Gorba. Jazada Mindu Sampi Ngadi, the Pumbola Dune Juba by the Hawel, Jazza Dune Juba Lupa means a Shapa di Hago to water. Di Hago to do Pumbo Kala Matu Rang when Juba now Nashinji, Meva Hagorba. Di Hago de Tomba Toba Resigurba.
Summarize what we've been looking at this weekend and also previously is first, perhaps a first step to add to the meditation is first the recognition that all our suffering, all the sufferings of samsara come about in dependence on our afflictions. Wanting to be freed of pain and misery, it's our afflictions that we need to eradicate. And to eradicate them, we need to identify their root cause, the ignorance of true grasping. And this ignorance takes every phenomenon that appears to consciousness as existing truly, as existing in the way that it appears. So having recognized that the purpose of this meditation is to gain freedom from pain, we now embark on the meditation, taking the object that's said to be the easiest to recognize, that of the self, come to see how our sense of self appears to us, how it appears as something solid, as intrinsic, as something fixed and real, that is not influenced or dependent on anything. That's the first step. The second is to go through the process of investigation. Does the self exist in the way that it appears? Is its way of appearing and its way of abiding or existing, are they in accordance or not? We investigate and we see we cannot find a self that is independent. Rather, what we're recognizing is the self is dependent on the physical aggregate. Our sense of self and our body is entwined. And our sense of self is also mixed with our mental aggregates in that our mental aggregates impact our sense of self. So whilst our I, our self, appears as independent, not only can no independent self be found, but it's clearly dependent on aggregates. Therefore, it is empty of existing by way of its own nature, or its own essence, or inherently, but it is dependent on the parts being the aggregates, a variety of causes, and imputation or labeling by mind. There's your homework. It's not homework that's not new, but hopefully this weekend you've been given more to add into this meditation to make it deeper. And it's so important. Come to recognize how our sense of self appears to us. And when we identify this, seek it out again and again and again. And this will lead to deep transformation within oneself. So thank you. We'll conclude here for this weekend and continue from the same place next week. Thank you very much.